According to the CDC, in just the past 2 years, there have been over 150 food recalls tied to canned and packaged goods, some crawling with bacteria, others coming with a bonus of heavy metals, like you've been slowly snacking on an old car battery. Picture this. That can of soup or veggies you thought was cheap and convenient is really a ticking time bomb just waiting to go off on your kitchen shelf. And here's where it gets darkly hilarious. Aldi, the so-called savings heaven for families on a budget, is stocking up on exactly this kind of stuff. The cruel joke? The people who can least afford the risk end up being the guinea pigs of the food industry. Tell me, what does convenience even mean when every can feels like playing Russian roulette in the grocery aisle? Spin the chamber and maybe you win high blood pressure, kidney burnout, or chemicals so controversial the FDA is still fighting about them. Tonight, we're cracking open 7 canned foods from Aldi that might make you take a hard look at your pantry, because the so-called comfort food could be the very thing quietly shaving years off your life. And let's be honest, nobody wants their 5-minute dinner fix to come with a lifetime subscription to free toxins. Vienna sausages. The pop of that tiny pull tab feels harmless, even comforting. For many low-income families and retirees, Vienna sausages are the quick fix that fills a plate without draining the wallet. But behind that salty nostalgia lies a web of warnings no shopper should ignore. According to the American Heart Association, just one can may hold 700 to over 1,000 milligrams of sodium. That's as much as 3/4 of the daily limit for someone with high blood pressure. The FDA allows the term reduced sodium to mean only 25% less than the original, which still leaves seniors consuming more salt than their bodies can safely handle. For older adults already managing blood pressure medications or kidney disease, this isn't just a snack, it's a spike that can throw the body into chaos. Some brands go further by swapping salt with potassium chloride. It sounds like a healthy alternative, but the National Kidney Foundation warns that older adults with chronic kidney disease or those taking common drugs such as ACE inhibitors could face dangerous heart rhythm problems. Imagine believing you made a healthier choice, only to discover the very swap increased your risk. That kind of betrayal is what leaves consumers questioning whether affordability has come at too high a cost. And the risks don't end with the ingredients. Vienna sausages are a low-acid canned food, which means they rely on perfect sterilization to stay safe. The CDC has repeatedly cautioned that botulinum toxin, the cause of botulism, has no smell, no taste, no warning. In 2023, over 2 million pounds of canned meat, including Vienna sausages, were recalled because packaging defects made contamination possible. A dented seam or weak seal is all it takes for an invisible danger to slip inside. Even the can itself isn't innocent. For decades, linings contained BPA, a chemical that regulators in Europe cut down to near zero in 2023, citing immune and hormonal concerns. While many cans now boast BPA-free, replacements such as BPS and BPF are still being studied for similar risks. Here in the US, the FDA has not set the same strict limits, leaving consumers in a grey zone of uncertainty. Processed meat brings its own baggage, nitrites that preserve colour but may form carcinogenic compounds, and phosphate additives that put strain on kidneys and arteries. The World Health Organization has already classified processed meat as a known carcinogen, making every small can more than just a snack. Vienna sausages are sold as tradition, as comfort, as convenience. But if this pattern continues, high sodium, chemical substitutes, risky linings, and recalls, how many more health scares are waiting? How many more families will shrug and say, just one more can, until the system forces them to pay the real price? The can is small, but the consequences for an older body already carrying the weight of survival may be far larger than anyone wants to admit. Canned tuna. You crack open that shiny lid and the familiar briny smell drifts out. For many working families and retirees, canned tuna feels like the closest thing to affordable protein left on the shelf. It has carried Americans through layoffs, tight paychecks, and empty pantries. But hidden beneath that comfort is a series of warnings that no one can afford to ignore. According to the FDA, albacore white tuna can carry nearly 3 times the mercury found in light tuna, a fact that places older adults at higher risk of memory loss, tremors, and kidney strain if eaten too often. Mercury does not leave the body quickly. It builds quietly year after year until the damage shows up in ways no family can afford to treat. And mercury is only the first shadow. The CDC has cautioned about histamine poisoning in tuna that has been improperly handled before canning. Histamine does not cook away, and once it develops, even the safest looking can may trigger flushing, pounding heartbeat and a frightening rush to the emergency room. People often mistake these symptoms for allergies or even heart attacks. It is a risk that hides in plain sight, and recalls over the last few years prove that the danger is more than theory. Botulism adds another layer of unease. While rare, the CDC confirms that canned fish is vulnerable if the sealing process fails. In 2025, several tuna products were recalled across major retailers because defective lids made contamination possible. Botulinum toxin has no smell, no taste, no warning, only consequences. Older bodies already juggling high blood pressure or kidney disease cannot afford that gamble. Even when the fish itself is safe, the can becomes part of the story. For decades, linings contained BPA, and although many now say BPA-free, scientists and regulators have raised concerns that replacements like BPS or BPF may carry similar hormone-disrupting risks. In 2023, Europe dropped its safe exposure level for BPA to nearly zero, while the FDA has yet to follow. This difference leaves American consumers, especially those on fixed incomes, caught between affordability and uncertainty. Canned tuna still holds value: protein, omega-3s, and convenience. But these benefits come tangled with risks that cannot be ignored. The smart move is not to abandon tuna entirely, but to choose wisely. Rotate with fresh or frozen options when possible. Drain and rinse to reduce sodium, and limit albacore if you are over 50. Because when a simple sandwich can tilt from nourishment to hazard, the real question remains: why are the cheapest foods the ones that cost the most in health? And how long will ordinary families have to bear that price before the system changes? Canned soup. You pull out a can of soup on a cold evening, and it feels almost sacred. Warmth, comfort, the illusion of care in a world that often feels merciless. But what happens when that comfort is nothing more than a disguise? According to the CDC, low-acid canned foods such as chicken noodle or beef stew require precise sterilization to prevent botulism, a toxin that is odorless, tasteless, and potentially deadly. Yet the recalls keep coming, reminding families that even the simplest bowl can turn into a silent betrayal. The real cruelty lies in the numbers hidden in plain sight. A single bowl of condensed tomato soup can carry more than 1,000 milligrams of sodium, almost an entire day's limit for anyone with high blood pressure. The FDA allows labels such as reduced sodium, but that only means 25% less than an already dangerous level. For the elderly living on medications, one warm bowl of soup may quietly undo the very treatments they struggle to afford. The companies know this, yet the shelves stay stocked, and the people most vulnerable are the ones asked to take the risk. It is not just salt. The National Kidney Foundation has warned about potassium chloride, now used as a substitute in many so-called healthier soups. For patients with kidney disease or those on common heart medications, this swap can tip blood chemistry into life-threatening territory. The substitution is marketed as progress, but to those who cannot safely process it, it feels like being tricked twice, once by the salt and again by its replacement. And then comes the can itself. For decades, linings contained BPA, a chemical Europe voted to ban in food packaging by late 2024 after slashing its safe intake to near zero. In the United States, the FDA still allows its use. The replacements BPS and BPF are still under scrutiny for their potential to mimic hormones. The very container meant to protect food has become another piece of the puzzle, leaving low-income families caught between hunger and hidden chemical exposure. This is where the betrayal cuts deepest. People buy canned soup because it is cheap, reliable, and advertised as wholesome. It is sold as a small gesture of dignity for those who cannot afford fresher choices. But if sodium, hidden additives, and questionable linings keep piling up, what is left but a cycle where the poor are forced to buy food that slowly undermines their health? How long will those with the least protection bear the heaviest risks while regulators argue and corporations profit? Canned soup should be nourishment, not a calculated gamble. Yet every pop of the can opener becomes a reminder that in a system tilted against the vulnerable, even comfort food has been twisted into a tool of survival at any cost. And the cost, for those already abandoned by the system, may be far higher than anyone is willing to admit. Canned chili. The can of chili sits there looking harmless, beans and beef waiting under a label that promises hearty and filling. But how many times have promises on cheap labels ended up being traps? The CDC reminds us that low-acid canned foods like chili require sterilization so precise that even a small slip can leave behind spores of botulism, a toxin invisible to sight, smell, or taste. In 2007, a chili recall shook the country when insufficient processing turned entire shipments into silent threats. Do we really believe corners are never cut in today's profit-driven system, where speed often outruns safety? Then comes the salt, that old familiar villain hiding in plain sight. 1 cup of canned chili can hold around 1,000 milligrams of sodium, nearly half of what the American Heart Association recommends as the safer limit for older adults. Do the math, eat the whole can, and you are already well over the line before you even add crackers or a soda. And when companies slap on the reduced sodium badge, many quietly swap in potassium chloride, a trick the National Kidney Foundation warns could push fragile kidneys and aging hearts into rhythm chaos. Isn't it strange how reduced on the label so often means increased risk in the body? Phosphates add another twist. They give chili that springy, uniform texture. But nephrologists warn these additives load the body with phosphorus that can stiffen arteries and weaken bones. For someone already balancing medications, that spoonful of chili starts to feel less like comfort food and more like a loaded dice game. And really, when did dinner turn into rolling the bones at Vegas, only with your arteries on the line instead of your paycheck? Even the can itself joins the conspiracy. Europe slashed BPA exposure limits to nearly zero in 2023, voting to ban it outright in food packaging by late 2024. Meanwhile, the FDA has not yet followed suit, and replacements like BPS or BPF may carry similar hormone-mimicking risks. So we are left asking, when regulators disagree, who pays the price? The corporations selling millions of cans, or the retirees quietly heating them up on a stove in Ohio, thinking they are safe? Canned chili sells itself as strength in a bowl, but behind the steam rises a list of dangers: sodium spikes, chemical swaps, hidden phosphates, and linings regulators can't agree on. How many more recalls? How many more silent poisonings before trust finally breaks? How long will older Americans have to shoulder these risks simply because their wallets cannot stretch to fresher choices? And yet, here lies the cruelest irony. The same beans that make chili risky inside a can can be nourishing if prepared at home. Rinse canned beans, simmer them with tomatoes, herbs, maybe a splash of olive oil, and you get protein, fiber, and comfort without the hidden sabotage. The problem isn't beans or spice, it's the system that packages them into shortcuts designed to last on a shelf instead of last in your body. So the next time you pop open a can of chili, ask yourself, is it really dinner you're opening? Or a bargain with a system that sold out your health long ago? Canned fruit. After chili, which hides danger in its heaviness, it feels almost comforting to think fruit could be the sweet relief, the safer balance on the shelf. But the irony is cruel. What should be nature's dessert becomes sugar in disguise, a cheap trick packaged for those who can least afford to be tricked again. The USDA notes that a cup of fruit cocktail in heavy syrup can contain more than 40 grams of added sugar, about 11 teaspoons poured straight into the bloodstream. For older adults already balancing high blood pressure, diabetes risk, and heart medications, Is this really dessert or a time bomb dressed in peaches and cherries? And even when labels promise light syrup, the illusion continues. Light only means slightly diluted sugar water, not healthy. The American Journal of Clinical Nutrition has linked higher added sugar intake to increased heart disease mortality, yet the cans remain stacked in discount aisles, calling out to wallets stretched thin. Is it an accident that the cheapest sweetness often comes loaded with the greatest harm? Or is it another design of a system where profit feeds on the vulnerable? The betrayal deepens when you look inside the can itself. For decades, epoxy linings relied heavily on BPA. In 2023, European regulators dropped safe exposure levels to nearly zero. And by 2024, the EU voted to ban BPA in food packaging altogether. But in the United States, the FDA has not taken the same step. BPA-free claims often mask replacements like BPS and BPF, chemicals suspected of carrying similar hormone-disrupting risks. So what should be a safe vessel for fruit has become another hidden hazard. How? Many families, reaching for something that looks wholesome, are unknowingly swallowing the costs of regulatory hesitation. Even the cherries have their warning lights. For decades, the red maraschino cherry was dyed with red number 3, a coloring the FDA now plans to ban in food by 2027 after animal studies suggested links to cancer. Some brands switched, others did not, leaving shoppers to guess which can holds a relic of yesterday's neglect. And as if that weren't enough, recalls in recent years pulled canned pears and peaches due to unsafe levels of heavy metals like lead and cadmium, not to mention fragments of glass found in shipments. How long will people be asked to gamble their health for the illusion of affordable sweetness? And yet, the fix feels so deceptively simple. Drain it, rinse it, or better yet, skip the syrup entirely and choose fruit canned in water or its own juice. Frozen fruit often costs the same, without the syrup, without the chemical bath, and without the roulette of dyes and recalls. The choice is clear on paper, but in reality, when a shopper at Aldi is counting every dime, do they have the luxury to walk past the cheap can for the slightly pricier bag of frozen? That is the bitter question. Because every spoonful of syrup isn't just fruit, it's the taste of a system that sold out the most vulnerable, asking them to pay with their health while calling it a bargain. Canned spinach. From fruit that promised sweetness but delivered syrup, we slide to something even more deceptive. A so-called superfood that turns into a liability once trapped in tin. Spinach, the very leaf once championed as strength in a bite, becomes a soggy compromise in a can. The World Health Organization has long warned about cadmium exposure, noting that leafy greens like spinach can pull this heavy metal from soil and hold it for decades in the human body. What does it mean for seniors who already carry the weight of weak kidneys and brittle bones? That every forkful of canned spinach may not be nourishment, but another quiet burden that lingers for 15 years at a time. The betrayal doesn't stop there. A single cup of canned spinach can bring over 700 milligrams of sodium, nearly half of an older adult's daily allowance before any bread or seasoning hits the table. And the reduced sodium versions. Often they lean on potassium chloride, the very additive that the National Kidney Foundation warns against for patients on ACE inhibitors or diuretics. How many times must reduced be revealed as nothing more than a sleight of hand, where one danger is swapped for another? Spinach also carries its natural baggage, oxalates that trigger kidney stones, and sky-high vitamin K levels that force anyone on blood thinners like warfarin into a delicate balancing act. Eat too much and the blood clotting swings. Eat too little and the medication falters. Since when did dinner become a tightrope walk where the penalty for one misstep isn't spilled soup but a hospital bill? And just as with chili or fruit, the can itself is no innocent bystander. For years, BPA-based linings coated vegetable cans. Europe banned BPA outright in 2024, but the FDA still claims safety at current levels. The replacements, BPS, BPF, come with their own shadows of hormone disruption. So we're left wondering, why is it that the burden of uncertainty always falls on those least able to fight back? The retiree reheating a cheap can of spinach at dinner is not signing up for chemical roulette, yet that's what the system places on their plate. The CDC reminds us that spinach is also a low-acid food, meaning botulism risk rises if sterilization or sealing fails. A bulging or leaking can is not just trash, it's Russian roulette without the drama. Toss it, they say. But will someone counting pennies risk tossing a can they stretch to afford? That's the cruel calculation imposed by poverty and policy alike. And here is the irony. Frozen spinach, often just as affordable on sale, skips many of these risks. It holds its shape, avoids heavy syrup, and sidesteps much of the sodium trap. The problem isn't spinach, it's the transformation of a natural powerhouse into a wilted, risky bargain. So next time you see a can of spinach promising strength, ask yourself, strength for whom? For the corporations padding profits? Or for the older Americans struggling to survive on a pension, forced to choose between safety and price? Canned pasta. From soggy spinach, we arrive at the so-called comfort food that looks innocent, smells nostalgic, and yet carries some of the sharpest betrayals on the shelf. Canned pasta. For many Americans, names like ravioli or spaghetti in a can conjure childhood memories, cheap meals after long shifts, or quick dinners for kids when bills pile up and energy runs out. But beneath that tomato-sweetened smile lies one of the harshest traps of all. According to the American Heart Association, adults with high blood pressure should aim for no more than 1,500 milligrams of sodium daily. A single cup of canned ravioli delivers around 740 milligrams, and a whole can often closer to 1,300. For seniors juggling blood pressure pills, that is half or more of the daily limit in one sitting. Is this really comfort food, or a setup for the very heart attacks doctors warn against? And when labels whisper reduced sodium, the twist is often cruel. Many brands replace salt with potassium chloride, the same additive that the National Kidney Foundation urges kidney patients to avoid. For a retiree on ACE inhibitors or potassium-sparing diuretics, that hidden swap could send blood potassium soaring, risking sudden heart rhythm chaos. Reduced, in this world, doesn't mean safer. It just means danger dressed differently. The source itself is no saint either. To keep that tomato-based shelf-stable and kid-friendly, companies often add sugar, corn syrup, and phosphate additives. Phosphates keep meatballs springy, but nephrologists warn that too much phosphorus accelerates kidney damage, stiffens arteries, and weakens bones in older adults. Sugar pushes blood glucose swings that clash with diabetes meds. Nitrites in processed meat increase cancer risk, as flagged by the World Health Organization. And when all of that sits inside a can, lined with BPA or its chemical cousins, the so-called meal becomes a chemical maze. Europe banned BPA in food packaging in 2024, citing risks to the immune system. The FDA still allows it. How many more decades will American households be told it's safe, while Europe moves the bar lower and lower? Even storage plays a role in this betrayal. A can left in a hot garage at 100 degrees is not just pasta. It is a chemical brew leaching into your food. Open it and leave leftovers in the same can. And that metallic tang is the lining breaking down into the sauce. The system knows this. Regulators admit it. Yet the burden of awareness falls not on corporations, but on the exhausted shopper just trying to put food on the table. Why is the cheapest choice always the riskiest? Why are those who can least afford mistakes asked to shoulder them every single meal? And here's the cruelest irony. Alternatives are not exotic luxuries. Dry pasta with a quick homemade sauce from canned tomatoes. Yes, the very same canned tomatoes that are safer because of their acidity can cost the same or even less per serving. But the truth is, when the red can of ravioli sits at eye level in Aldi, bright and ready, it preys on memory, on fatigue, on price tags that look merciful until you add up the hospital bills. Canned pasta is not just a meal. It is a symbol of how a system packages nostalgia, sells it back to the working class, and leaves them to pay the hidden costs in silence. In the end, it's not just about canned food. It's about trust, survival, and the system that quietly decides what reaches your table. If these truths made you pause, imagine what else lies hidden. Subscribe now, join the conversation, and demand the dignity of safer choices for every American household.